when we were at Wollongong, the church was situated at the top of a big hill. We used to call it Corony Hill. And the old people, like me, used to get there early. And the young families, pardon me, used to arrive right as the first song or during the first worship segment. And we learned never to take the offering up early in the service because half of them weren't there. But standing there watching people arrive, the older people seemed to arrive very serenely, sedately, but the young families were interesting to watch. You see Mum and Dad get out of the car looking a little bit perplexed, grabbing the baby that hadn't had an all changing breeze as they were about to leave the home. The teenagers looking very surly because they'd been dragged out of bed, and the kids had breakfast all over their face. And it was an interesting experience watching all that. And you learned that not every family fell into that trap. Some families arrived all organised. They had their act together. Others were really struggling. And I guess that's what I'm going to call my sermon this morning. How do we get our act together? Over the past few weeks we've dealt with how I can be a confident person, how I can cope with depression, how I can leave mistakes behind. But this morning I want to talk about how we can be a whole integrated person, how we can get our act together. And we've heard from Psalm 103 as we've sang, and also in the reading this morning. And the very first verse is, listen to it, "Bless the Lord, O my soul, and all that is within me, bless his holy name." Some people talk about themselves a heck of a lot. Some people focus on themselves a heck of a lot. And sometimes when you're hearing a person's history, it's all about them. But this guy, writing this psalm, has his eyes somewhere else. Bless the Lord, O my soul. Marge and I, in the course of our ministries, have met thousands of people. And every now and again you come across someone with a Peter Pan ego. What do I mean by that? Some years ago, Scripture Union put out a little audio-visual called Number One. I don't know if you remember that, 1970s I think it was produced. And it was very interesting. It was all about a little baby who was born, and he was number one. All through his life, he had someone to look after him. Someone changed his nappy, someone fed, someone took him for walks, and these someones were just little blobs. As he became a teenager, the people stayed as blobs, and everybody looked after his needs. And then came the time when he got married, and he expected his wife to be another blob who would look after him and serve his needs. And as you look at that, you start to see people who are completely self-centered, and the world around them is just made up of blobs who look after them. They are number one. We saw a very good example of that in a week or so ago when a tennis player, I forget what country she was from, but she was complaining about the lockdown and how unfair it was, etc., etc. The next day, she got the virus. And I thought to myself, well, the chickens come home to roost. And there was another girl under lockdown. She was a fiancée of a tennis player. And she said, I've got nobody to wash my hair. I've got to wash my hair myself. She was another number one. People who circle around her looking after her. And number one survive in the church today. Number one say, I'm here to serve the church, it's what the church can do for me. And in the audio visual you see this very, very clearly. And we see it with the people we meet. Number ones end up with broken relationships. Their lives are destroyed. They are dysfunctional. And they struggle with unemployment. They struggle with conflict because they are number one and they don't see the needs there. And the number one question is, who is around me at the moment who will look after me? Now listen to the psalmist. Bless the Lord, O my soul. He's able to lift up his eyes and see that he is not the centre of the universe. He is part of the universe. And when we see it like that, it helps us to prevent becoming number one. And forget not his benefits. Bless the Lord, O my soul, and do not forget his benefits. Gratitude is a beautiful part of life. Some years ago I was talking to a manager of a printing firm, the owner of a printing firm, and I noticed at 10:30 in the morning that the bell went and everybody stopped like that. At 11:15 the bell went again and everybody started. And I said, do people observe that law so carefully? Surely there's a little bit of room for movement. And he said, no, we don't have any room for movement. If I give people any benefit, apart from the trade union benefits, if I give people any benefit, they start to take it for granted. And I noticed when we had staff in the various churches we worked in, that we would never ever gave a salary rise. If a person was working very hard within the church, we would give them a bonus. And that's different. I don't know, if, Ron, if you're in management, whether you used to take this attitude, but when a person gets a salary rise because of hard work, they take it for granted. When they get a bonus, there is a tremendous feeling of gratitude. And when we see this, bless the Lord, O my soul, forget not his benefits. It reminds me of Philippians, where Paul encouraged us to pray with supplication, with thanksgiving, learning to lift up our heads and see some beautiful things that are happening around us. At the moment I'm reading a story of a woman called Holly Bode. You've probably never heard of it. She's a Dutch lady who lived during the Second World War as a 20-year-old, and she rescued lots of Jewish children during the German occupation in Holland. And eventually she was caught, and off to prison she went. And it was interesting reading her story, because most of her stories like that reflect a lot of misery, a lot of punishment, a lot of sadness and so on. She seemed to retain a positive attitude towards it. And when you get to the end of her story, you say, she was asked, do you regret the fact that you spent so long in prison? She said, no, I helped 150 children escape from the Nazis. And there was a feeling of gratitude in her life. Another time I was preaching in a church in Sydney, and the minister there had a session where he asked people to just reflect on their lives and what was happening this week, and anything they wanted to thank God for. And one old guy, he must have been 75, 80, one old guy stand up and he says, I want to thank God for the last 10 years. I had a heart transplant 10 years ago, and every day has been a bonus. What a beautiful attitude. And what a beautiful transformation can happen in our lives if we learn the secret of gratitude. I remember a guy saying to me some time ago, I wouldn't have you a job for quids. And he was talking about ministry and so on. We don't do it for quids. There's not many quids in the job. And when you hear that, I reflect on it and I say, no, I've enjoyed life. I've enjoyed being involved in ministry. And the greatest thing can happen is when someone comes up to you and says, 25 years ago I heard something you said and it did da-da-da-da-da-da. And when you hear that, it makes you appreciate the fact that, like that woman in the Holland, you've had an influence on other people. And I thank God for that opportunity. One of the things that I've noticed, and this doesn't apply to Parkdale Church, one of the things I've noticed in surveys and work I've done with churches, that the more recent arrivals in a church are more grateful for their gospel, more grateful for the church and what it's doing for them. Those of us who are veterans can easily forget the secret of gratitude and thanking God for the beautiful things that have happened in life. And this psalmist knows forgiveness. He forgives all your iniquity and heals all your diseases. carry a heavy burden of guilt around with us, it means that we're not going to get our act together. Now, I see two extremes. I see people who are what I would call amoral. Not immoral, amoral. They don't have a guideline. They live their lives without a code. They project blame onto other people. They manipulate other people, and they never at fault. Have you read anybody like that, about anybody like that in the paper in recent times? And the other extreme are the people who are perpetually guilty, perpetually seeing the faults in their lives, perpetually seeing the wrongdoings and the people that they've let down. And somehow or other we need to strike a balance. We don't want to be imprisoned by guilt like this person. We don't want to be immoral like this person. We need to have a balance. And when we find that middle ground, we will find that the past will not drag us down. We need to have healthy respect for boundaries and understand what forgiveness is about. One theologian was asked, what is the central theme of the gospel? And his answer was simple, forgiveness. And you think of Jesus Christ, you think of the sacrifice on the cross, you think of all that has happened, you think of the repeated times in the New Testament it says, leave the past behind, and that's what baptism is all about, and we need to appropriate that to our lives. Now, I don't know if in this room, is there a person like this? A person who's continually dragging the past behind and being dragged down by it? Understand the freedom. It's a beautiful hymn. My chains fell off. Remember that? And that's what we need to see. We need to see the freedom that is available to us in Jesus Christ. It goes on to say, He heals all your diseases. Now, I'm not too sure about that. And when we think of our own lives, we've all had an illness or two, but I'll tell you what it does do. It heals us from the gospel, it heals us from the illness of being dragged down by the past and our failures. And then we read that the psalmist is redeemed from premature death. He redeems your life from the pit, who crowns you with steadfast love and mercy. Now, last week we were talking about this. What is this pit? It's talking about Sheol. And in the Old Testament, in the Hebrew Scriptures, you don't read about hell. They didn't understand hell. In fact, there are very few references to life after death in the Old Testament. But everybody who died went to Sheol. And one part of the Old Testament, Deuteronomy and Leviticus, says, if you live a good life, you'll have plenty of cattle, have a good wife, a good family and all that type of thing, and you will live a long, sustained life. He redeems your life from the pit, who crowns you with love and mercy. But I doubt that. We've discovered that good people die early. And someone should be talking to the disciples who all died, young men. Only one survived to an old age. You know who that was? John, well done. Yeah, John survived to an old age. All the other disciples died early. And plenty of good people, as we could say in this room, die young. How can we adapt this verse to what we know in the New Testament and what we know of life? He redeems your life from the pit, who crowns you with love and mercy. I could talk about these guys because they're all gone, and you don't know who I'm talking about. But when we were at Blackburn, we had a group of retired ministers. Retired ministers, you need to look out for them because they are a bunch of grumps. And this lot were a bunch of grumps. And we'd have the morning service and we'll head off for coffee somewhere and have a whinge, roast a preacher, and how things have changed and things aren't like what they used to be. And they really got upset when we started to modernise the music. And we found that these people had suffered from hardening of the arteries. No, hardening of the thought processes. Getting old is not getting puffed when you climb the stairs. Getting old is being closed to a new way of thinking. And one of the enemies One of the enemies, one of the thoughts that really upsets people who want to be a change agent is when you hear this phrase, wait for it, that is the way we have always done it. That is the quickest way to head a church for destruction.